Hi everyone, my name is Suze Leitão. I'm an Associate Professor in Speech Pathology from Fremantle, Western Australia, working at Curtin University. And I'm here today talking with
Dr. Michelle St Clair. I am a co-founder of the Engage with DLD project, and I am a senior lecturer in developmental psychology at the University of Bath in the UK.
So what we're going to talk to you today about is our cohort profile paper from the Engage with DLD project. We're very proud of it. But perhaps what we'll start with, Michelle, is what motivated you and the other co-founding members of E-DLD, who were Nikki Botting and Jenny Gibson. What motivated you to start this project in the first place?
Well, the main motivation for me was experience with my first PhD student after I got my lectureship here in Bath. So I thought we could do in 3 years, recruit 30 to 40 adolescents with DLD and do a longitudinal study within a 3-year PhD. That was wildly optimistic. We got our final sample was 26 adolescents with DLD. We tested over 40 over a 3-year period, but there's no longitudinal data at all. We were able to get our sample and do one testing battery, which is fine, which is more than sufficient for a PhD. But that experience of taking 2.5 years to recruit 26 individuals who met our criteria, which admittedly was very strict because we had a very strict autism criteria, but it was eye-opening for me. And when I talked to my colleagues, Jenny and Nikki, they were also similarly frustrated with how difficult it is because we know these people are out there. DLD is very prevalent. I should not take this amount of effort to recruit a study, a PhD sample.
So what this really highlighted for you was that whilst we know DLD is prevalent, the gap between the people with DLD and the research that's going on in the area is huge. But what that means is that people with DLD are not having their voice heard. They're not actually able to engage in research. So you set up the Engage with DLD project as a way of bringing those two together, which I think is absolutely brilliant. So what the whole thing is premised on, certainly at first, is our participant database. So perhaps you could just tell everyone a little bit about what is that database? What kind of data are we collecting?
Well, our database currently has about 242 parents of children with DLD and about 33 adults with DLD. And the data that we're collecting is, first of all, contact information. Because it's a participant database, we need to be able to contact our participants. We do this mainly over email, or very basically only over email, except if the email doesn't work. And then we collect information on age, siblings of the children and siblings of the adults in case, hopefully to facilitate sibling studies in the future, and also ethnicity, country of residence. So we have people from all continents except for Antarctica on the database at the minute, and we collect data on languages spoken and let me see, and then official diagnosis as well. So we get official diagnoses of both the children and the adults if the adults have a diagnosis. And what's really interesting is that with the adult database, we've had to create a screening questionnaire because we've realized that there's a lot of adults out there that basically know they have DLD. They fit the whole profile of somebody that has DLD, but they don't have the official diagnosis. So that's one of the things that we're really working on, is to validate our screening questionnaire to identify undiagnosed adults with DLD at the minute.
So we start with kind of collecting that broad, what you might call demographic information, painting a picture of who's joining us, where they're from, because we're pretty international. And then we try and collect data about speech and language and other needs over each year, isn't it? We do an annual data collection.
Well, we do have some information on the different types of language needs in the sign-up survey as well. So we collect some of that data in the sign-up survey. But over the years, 2 weeks after an individual signs up, they're invited to take a yearly survey. About half of our participants do, about half of our E-DLD members do. And then that survey for the children, it changes as they age. So it depends on the age of the child as to what kind of questions get asked as we go along. And for the adults, we have a static survey. So they get the same survey over each year. But that's going to be interesting in and of itself to see how things change across time.
Absolutely.
If somebody gets a new job, does their satisfaction with life increase? Does their depressive symptoms go down? Or do they go up? Those kind of things, questions that we can ask in the future with our adult data.
Yeah. So if we turn directly to the paper itself, one of our main findings, which I found very reassuring, was that just our overall profile of who was in our database was very much in keeping with what we might expect. So it was very sort of valid in the sense of fit the profile of people with DLD in terms of strengths and areas of need. What about some of the other information that we found, some of our other findings that we found?
I think one of the main things is the high rates of self-reported anxiety, which is, again, in the sign-up survey, we ask about comorbid difficulties. So the anxiety issues were highly prevalent at about 30% of all children. The parents reported significant anxiety issues. And that was much higher than I think I expected, but it is also keeping in with current research in both my lab as well as your lab, Suze, I believe, is that there is a high rate of anxiety in children with DLD. And I think that is an interesting piece of research to take forward. And also, we also find about 60% of our children have clinical level sleep difficulties, which is quite a lot of children. And is also a replication of some work that Nikki Botting has previously done as well, finding really high rates of parent-reported sleep difficulties in these children. So I think that's an interesting finding from the paper that hopefully will be taken forward as well. And then just for the adults, we have a very high rate of clinical level depression and anxiety problems, again, replicating the findings from the child report data. And also clinical level alexithymia issues, which is your ability to understand the emotions that you're experiencing. So our adults are reporting a difficulty with that ability to identify your own emotions, which is really interesting.
These are really interesting findings, and I think they're sort of coming out at a time when researchers around the world, the US, Europe, and Australia, are looking more broadly at DLD beyond just profiling language strengths and weaknesses, but looking at impact, looking at functional activity and participation, looking at mental health. And I think our cohort is really contributing to that understanding, which means then, I guess, perhaps what we could talk about now are the clinical implications of these findings, both for clinicians, but also for the people and the families of people with DLD.
I think there is a few clinical implications. I think the sleep one is really interesting because there could be a connection between, well, we know that there is a connection between sleep and language learning in general. There's literature linking sleep and language learning, in particular vocabulary. And if there are sleep difficulties in children with DLD, that may in the future form part of the clinical picture. Maybe improving sleep hygiene could help improve the language learning opportunities of that child. I'm not at all suggesting that you improve sleep will take away a disorder. You cannot cure DLD, but it could help. It could become part of the clinical picture. But again, we need more research, because an alternative possibility is that the anxiety that these children are experiencing is driving the sleep difficulties.
Absolutely.
And that's another clinical picture, but it's not necessarily going to link directly to their language difficulties or their ability to learn language. So we just need more research in that area. And also just the clinical picture of understanding the wider difficulties of these children, that there is psychosocial difficulties, there is sleep difficulties, there is anxiety, that I think needs to be brought into the clinic a bit more. Now, I'm not a clinician, so I'm a bit hesitant saying that, but I think we need a more holistic picture of the difficulties, the developmental difficulties really that these children are experiencing beyond just the language needs.
And I think at this very point in time in 2023, there is research coming out around the world that is looking at these sorts of things, that is perhaps interviewing people themselves who have DLD, whether they're children or adults, families of people with DLD, and having a much better understanding of these bigger picture strengths and needs, these impacts, and how a language difficulty can impact much more widely than just on perhaps the narrow thing of language and learning. And so I think in that sense, our database is really important, because we talked at the beginning about the gap between that you found and we find here we know the people are there, we know they're out there, but we as researchers and even as clinicians, but certainly as researchers, we can't find them, but that means they can't find us. And so if people with DLD want to have a voice, they want to have a part to play in the development of the research that is done not on them, but with them and about them and for their families, then being a part of our cohort study or being a part of our cohort is fantastic as an opportunity for them. And although this isn't in our paper, another part of our Engage with DLD is that we can put researchers who are doing ethically approved research in touch with participants. We can advertise projects to our participants on our database if they choose to take part. So I think what we're really about is connecting these two together, and at the same time having a much better understanding of the profile of our cohort.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So I guess as we draw this to an end, we would encourage people who are watching us have this chat. It's not really a traditional abstract, is it? We didn't do a structured abstract. We did a chew the fat talk. We really want people to think, gosh, that paper sounds interesting, in which case they can click on the link that will be somewhere on this page because it's an open access paper. And what that means is it doesn't matter if you don't have a library subscription. It doesn't matter if you don't have a way of getting to that journal. You can click on the paper and it's free. And I believe we also have like a more, what am I trying to say, plain English summary of the paper as well that we'll click onto our page here on Engage with DLD. So thanks, Michelle. I think we've done a pretty good job, I hope, of telling people about a paper that we're pretty proud of.
Yes. Yeah, I think we have. Thank you so much, Suze, for doing this.
You're most welcome, and you too.